director of Vita in Virginia. We also have with us here today Isabel Waller-Bridge, who was the composer of this film, and Mark Trent, the editor. Thank you so much for coming today and for bringing your film to Toronto. We were very excited to share it with our audiences. And so my first question is for Chanya. So I've read that you're quite a fan of Virginia Woolf, but how did this project come to you, and why did you want to tell this story?
Woolf has always been my favourite writer, and Gemma Arterton, in fact, brought me the project. We knew each other through RADA. We both went to RADA in London. I studied theatre directing and she was there on the acting course, and we had always been looking for something to do together. And she knew I was a huge fan of Woolf, and the reason I wanted to make a film about this particular moment in Virginia Woolf's life is that she's somebody who we have, if we can be relied on to know anything about her, it's how she died. Whereas I think this story marks a moment of profound strength in her life, where her sort of creative genius arrived to save her from an experience that everybody around her thought would overwhelm her. So I've always thought, I think her writing is so vivid and bold and colourful and alive, and I truly believe she's somebody who was more alive than all of us put together. So I wanted to make a film that reflected that, because I have always felt that her legacy was a little bit too fragile.
Absolutely. And there's so much intimacy that we learn in their relationship through these letters. So how did you kind of arrive at the style of, having the narration and the letters being read whilst playing out their kind of their relationship?
Well, yeah, really specifically those letter sequences, which are, Vita and Virginia's letters to each other. If you care to read them, there are several tomes sent to each other over the course of their 15-year, after their sort of the romantic element of their relationship ended. They were then friends until the end of Virginia's life. Their relationship was complex and many-layered and not just romantic. And I knew that the letters are so beautiful. They're both incredibly dexterous writers, and I knew that in bringing those letters to the screen, I would need to do it in a way that justified them being on the screen, because a letter is meant to be read. It's private and interior. So that sort of, I had hoped that those the style that we approached those sequences with the direct address, kind of very urgent, very surreal feeling sequences, that you would have an experience of what it might be like to receive one of those letters. So yeah, that's how we built the intimacy around that, and I work from very early on in my process with my sort of key heads of department. So very early on, when I was writing, Isabel and I were already talking about the approach we wanted to take. When I was writing, Mark and I were already talking about the approach we wanted to take, as we had done on our first film. So I think part of the reason the film feels quite like many-layered and that intimacy really comes through is because we start our work from very, very early on.
Absolutely. And so we need to talk about this score. It's perfectly sublime. And so what was the inspiration, I guess, for this original take on the score for a period drama, essentially?
Is that a question for me? I mean, really, that's
both
also...
of you, yeah, kind of creating this together.
I'll intro. You be the headline. I'll be your hype man. So this is a film, as I hope you agree, about two incredibly unconventional women. And I knew we would have to have a very unconventional approach to bringing their story to life. They lived lives that were incredibly progressive, that would be incredibly progressive even for now, let alone, the 1920s. So I thought that we needed a sound that felt progressive even for now. And I think that Isabel's score there's something that feels like looking into the future with it. It feels, I think it's a very progressive piece of work even for now. So
yeah, and I remember at the beginning when we started talking about it and we were sort of sharing playlists of music that they might be, if it was now, like what if we went to a really sort of like radical party, like what would we be sort of listening to?
I don't go to radical parties.
If we went to
a party, what would that be like? It's something we've asked ourselves so many times.
But we like made some like really key decisions about instrumentation like really early on. Like so we were like definitely no piano and things like that would kind of root it in a really period where and then I just started sketching and sort of sharing, and then it just sort of evolved into what it is. But yeah, I think.
Yeah. And so with Mark, I guess finding the rhythm of this film must have come so much from the music and from, all these discussions. So how did you guys come to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the music's obviously hugely important for the rhythm of the piece, but also I think the performances, you don't want to muck about with them too much, and it's very easy to destroy a beautiful performance by overcutting. And I think especially with scenes like Elizabeth's breakdown, which is the sort of loss of language, you just want to see that, and you don't want to. We had versions of that where you're sort of cutting around, seeing all the reactions of everyone else in the room, and I think when you've got a performance like that, you want to sit with it and sort of feel that uncomfortableness and kind of awkwardness in the room, and really see the distress that she's in. So that's like kind of one scene where that happens. But certainly the music kind of really helps with kind of establishing a rhythm through large bits of the film. But sort of particularly sort of towards the beginning, we're kind of doing these very bold choices, and the music's really going there. And we work very closely together, the three of us at that time.
Yeah. We cut a lot to quite. We cut a lot of the early work was quite a lot of disco.
Yeah, there was quite a lot of disco. Because while we're waiting for Isabel, she hasn't seen anything until we cut something. So we cut with a bit of temp. We kind of like some emotional scenes. We try not to put any temp on at all and just see what Isabel comes up with. But yeah, like the party scene, I think there was various sort of Donna Summer LCD sound systems in there for a bit.
Daft Punk.
Daft Punk was in there. Hot Chip was in there.
But it's such an interesting thing, the relationship between the three of us. In general, it's fascinating, but professionally, because there's a real kind of Isabel and Mark kind of run a kind of quite frantic relay race over the course of the years that we work on making the film. So we using temp music when you're cutting, because the composer will only work, as of course I'm sure you all know, the composer will work later on in the process. So the temp music we choose has an influence on the rhythm of the scene, and then when the music arrives, we hope that fits. So having a really kind of symbiotic relationship works really, really well. So we created really early playlists of, Isabel was incredibly helpful with like sending really early playlists of things that I would actually play when we were shooting, and then we'd like temp with that stuff. So there was no sound, even in music we would temp to or have playing on set, there was no sound that hadn't sort of gone through.
Yeah, that wasn't going to be the sort of language.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there was a time where we cut, I can't remember what sequence it was now. I think it might have been one of the party scenes when I sort of first cut it, and I did a bit of research, sort of what sort of music would they have been listening to and all that sort of thing, and ended up with something kind of quite traditional score.
Oh, it felt so.
And I showed it to Chanya, and she was almost sick on me. It was like, that's not the film. Yeah. That's not what we're doing. And I think we kind of felt that every time it sort of veered to traditional.
Really interesting. I felt like we really did feel like that's really organically sort of like completely respective as well.
And one time we cut a trailer that we decided to do ourselves to Chameleonaire.
Basic.
Sometimes we'll do things like that to amuse ourselves.
It's very amusing.
But it hasn't made it into the work.
Okay, we're going to open up the questioning to the audience now. Yes, gentlemen here.
How and when does your vision of casting part from?
Okay, so the question is, when does casting come into the process, or when did your vision of this cast come into the process?
Well, Gemma brought me the project, so Gemma was always our Vita, but shares so many qualities with Vita. In that there's this wonderful side to Vita that is incredibly nurturing and nourishing and maternal in a way, even though there's this sort of brutality that's another side to her. And, you know, Gemma, in bringing me the script and supporting me as a filmmaker, as a young, a young filmmaker, when she could have taken the script to anyone, it makes sense to me. I would have taken this character to her anyway, because she has so much of herself in terms of Vita's really positive qualities that really shine through. And then in terms of Virginia, casting Virginia was one of the most challenging and therefore fascinating sort of casting Rubik's Cubes I've had to solve, because she's a woman who, as you will have seen in the film, the portrait that Vanessa Bell, her sister, paints of her doesn't have a face. So she's someone whose own sister had an ineffable quality to her. And so when you're looking at that, this is somebody whose own sister paints a portrait of her faceless, such is her kind of sort of transient, ineffable nature. That's an ultimate casting challenge. So I came to Elizabeth through a play I saw her in at the National Theatre in London, and then had incredible conversations with her on Skype when she was shooting Stephen Queen's film Widows. And she came straight from that set to ours and has been at this festival with both films this year. So that's how I came to both of them. And then in terms of the rest of the casting, that comes once the film gets going a bit more. But I certainly write with people in mind. And I have a big network of people who, on my HOD side, I have a big sort of family I generally tend to work with. And on the acting side too, I've got loads of ongoing relationships that I tend to return to.
Very nice. Okay, another question from the audience. Got time. Yep, just in here.
So,
oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah. The question was, how did you come to write the script, or how did you, I guess, which letters would you choose from, and things like that? Yeah.
Well, there is a stage play called Vita and Virginia that Dame Eileen Atkins wrote and did on Broadway with Vanessa Redgrave in the 80s, I think. Mm-hmm. And this screenplay is sort of inspired by that. And Eileen wrote a very early draft of the screenplay at the time, I think, when she was doing the play. So there was a very, very early draft that was very sprawling, it was set over the 15 years of Vita and Virginia's relationship. So my first choice was to make the whole film centre around the inception of Orlando, because I think that's the most explosive, exciting point in their relationship. And I was interested in not trying to make a biopic of either women, because both of their lives were so rich that it would be impossible to distill and make a sort of that kind of biographical film. So I wanted to take a really intense, many-layered look at a very specific moment in their lives that was the kind of crucible in which their relationship was formed. So that was a really early decision I made. And then in terms of kind of stripping away or putting in other members of their wider circle that we know a lot about, the film has to be about Vita and Virginia's relationship. And something I have learned over the course of making my films and became even more apparent on Vita and Virginia was, 100 minutes is not a lot of time. Anything that isn't serving the central storyline, anything that isn't serving and telling you why Vita and Virginia are feeling that way at that time, or what the next step of their relationship is, or who's made a misstep, or whatever, anything that isn't serving that central storyline kind of comes out like a thorn, and you would, even if it was, there were a couple of scenes that I wrote that I was really very attached to that Mark wrenched from my hands. And that's the value.
They were good scenes.
Thank you. That's the value of a really great editor as well, because I wrote storylines. I was desperate to go into more detail with Duncan Grant and Vanessa Bell. Their relationship's fascinating, but Mark wouldn't let me. So he's why.
Yes, extra features, deleted scenes. Okay, I think that's all the time we have for today. But thank you very much for joining us. And if you enjoyed the film, don't forget to vote for it for the People's Choice Award at tiff.net/vote. Thank you.